Hello, I'm Reagan. At my grandfather's will reading, my sister stood up, smiled, and tore the inheritance letter right in front of the judge. No one stopped her. Not my father. Not the lawyer. Not even the people who used to call me family. They said I didn't belong, that I'd been gone too long, that I didn't earn anything. But what if the house they tried to sell wasn't even theirs to begin with? And what if the only reason they ever wanted me erased was because they knew I was the only one Grandpa trusted? What would you do if your family tried to cut you out of history? The moment I pulled into the Greystone Law parking lot, my stomach started to tighten. Not from nerves, those had dried up years ago, but from something older, deeper, the kind of ache that comes when you know you're walking into a room where people stopped considering you family a long time ago. The office was housed in a historic brick building tucked between a wine bar and a closed antique bookstore. Savannah has a way of making even its knives look polished. I adjusted the collar of my blazer, brushed my thumb over the worn leather of my purse strap, and walked in. The paralegal at the front desk barely looked up. "Name?" "Reagan Greystone," I said, steady and clear. She blinked, glanced at her screen, and frowned. I don't see your name on the attendance list." Of course she didn't. I offered a tight smile. "I was told by Marshall himself to be here. If that's a problem, you can let the judge sort it out." Her eyes narrowed slightly. After a pause too long to be polite, she gestured to the side room. "Fine. Last door on the left." The hallway smelled like lemon polish and dusted off intentions. I paused outside the door, let the scent settle in my memory, then pushed it open. Inside, a long oak table stretched across the room, sunbeams slicing across the chairs through floor-length windows. At the head sat Leonard, my father. Next to him, perfectly poised, was Seraphine. Of course, her name tag was elegant, gold-rimmed, perched in front of her like a trophy. My eyes scanned the rest of the seating. Name tag, name tag, name tag. No name for me. I took the empty seat at the far end, nearest the windows. No tag, no introduction. The sunlight caught the edge of my boot, dusting it with light. I stayed quiet. It wasn't the first time they tried to erase me. Behind me, the door opened again. Heels clicked, perfume wafted, a mix of overripe lilies and wealth. Margot, my stepmother. She floated toward me with a sweet smile painted in permanent marker. "Oh, I'm sorry, what's your name again?" she asked, eyes sparkling just enough to register malice. "Raquel? Remind me." "Reagan," I said flatly. She tapped her temple like she'd just remembered something terribly difficult. "Right. Of course, Reagan. How could I forget?" She moved away before I could respond, which was probably for the best. A couple of cousins chuckled under their breath like it was all part of the entertainment. It was the third time she'd pulled that trick in public. Once is an accident, twice is passive aggression, 3 times, that's surgical. I glanced across the room. Seraphine was glowing, in that way only she could. Expensive clothes, flawless posture, lips that curled just enough to show the camera-friendly version of smugness. She hadn't even glanced in my direction. That made sense. To acknowledge me would be to admit I still existed. I kept my hands folded in my lap, knuckles resting against the leather of the purse I'd carried for 10 years. It had been a gift from Grandpa, Marshall, after I'd completed basic training. "Something sturdy," he'd said. "For someone who doesn't break easy." I didn't break, but I did bend. A lot. The last time I'd been around all of them was Thanksgiving 4 years ago. I came home from deployment unannounced. My room had been converted into a storage closet. Boxes, a treadmill no one used, fake ficus in the corner. The door still had a plaque, but it didn't read Reagan's room anymore. It read storage, seasonal. That was when I knew I wasn't a disappointment. I was a deletion. Back in the room, the temperature shifted. The door creaked open once more. Everyone stiffened slightly as Mr. Bellamy, the estate attorney, stepped in, adjusting his tie with practiced formality. He carried a manila folder and a steel expression. "We'll begin reading Mr. Marshall Greystone's final will. All recognized heirs, please confirm your identity when called." He began with Leonard. "Present," my father answered, voice clipped and confident. "Seraphine?" "Here," she said smoothly, like she was announcing herself at a gala. The names continued. Cousins, uncles, even Margot. My name never came. Bellamy looked down, turned a page. Still nothing. I waited, expecting a pause, a glance, anything. It didn't come. And that's when I knew. This wasn't a mistake. My hand brushed the inside pocket of my coat, fingertips grazing the envelope's edge. I didn't pull it out. Not yet. That piece of paper wasn't just paper. It was weight, warning, and weapon. Grandpa had given it to me under a burnt orange sunset with his coffee half full and his voice already tired. "They won't like this," he'd said, "but you'll know when it's time." This didn't feel like time yet. Bellamy continued reading the will like he was checking off a grocery list. "To my grandson Caleb, I leave my hunting rifles. To Leonard Greystone, I leave my set of signed first edition Hemingway novels and a $10,000 donation in his name to the Georgia Council for Business Ethics." That got a few awkward coughs. Then he read out Seraphine's name. "To Seraphine Greystone, my granddaughter, I leave the family trust account, the proceeds from the summer property in Blue Ridge, and all remaining corporate shares not designated in a separate addendum." She didn't flinch. She didn't need to. That smile of hers, soft, practiced, perfectly measured, already knew. It wasn't just what they gave her. It was what they didn't say about me. Not a single mention. No to my granddaughter Reagan, not even a line about something symbolic like a watch or a family photograph. Just silence. Clean, surgical. And then came the kicker. Bellamy cleared his throat. "A note here. It appears the original signed addendum referred to earlier has been misplaced. What we have is a scanned photocopy, unsigned." There was a slight rustle of papers, like everyone was shifting to hide their discomfort. Seraphine raised a single hand, delicate like she was adjusting a necklace. "Forgive me, but a photocopy?" She gave a soft laugh that was more for the room than for Bellamy. "You know that's not admissible in court, right?" Bellamy didn't answer right away. I watched him shift in his seat, a flicker of discomfort crossing his face before he nodded. "In most cases, no. A signed original is needed for legal enforcement." And just like that, the last thread of credibility snapped. Seraphine leaned back in her chair, satisfied. Margot whispered something to her, and they both smiled like they'd just confirmed dessert was on its way. My mouth stayed shut. I wasn't going to throw punches in a room full of lawyers until I had the right weapon, and right now, that weapon was still tucked in my coat. The lights dimmed for a moment as the media screen in the corner flickered to life. Bellamy motioned toward it. "Per Mr. Greystone's wishes, we'll now show a brief memorial slideshow." Photos faded in and out. Grandpa in his Navy uniform, Grandpa at the garden table with Leonard and Margot, Grandpa and Seraphine at the boardwalk, and then the old front porch of Springridge House. I recognized the day instantly. It was early fall. I was 13. My hair was in 2 loose braids, and Grandpa had let me paint the railing with him. I'd gotten paint on my overalls, and he laughed so hard he nearly dropped the brush. But in the photo, I wasn't there. Grandpa was on the porch. The paint cans were in the frame, So was Seraphine, sitting in the corner, holding a glass of lemonade she hadn't helped pour. But no Reagan. I'd been cropped out. Slide after slide, the story unfolded, a version of our family where I'd never existed. I knew that dress, I knew that dog, I knew that trip to Charleston, even though my body was missing from every captured moment. Someone had edited the truth. I felt the burn in my chest, not tears, not this time, but that slow, rising heat that comes when someone takes your memories and calls them their own. When they take your place at the table and tell you the chair was never yours. They're not just erasing me, I thought. They're rewriting the whole thing. The video ended. The lights came back on. Bellamy adjusted his glasses. That concludes the formal reading and presentation of Mr. Greystone's estate, unless anyone here has additional documentation to provide. He looked around the room with a neutral face. Seraphine's eyes scanned the room too, but not for information. She was checking for weakness. I reached into my coat pocket. I didn't pull out the envelope yet. I just held it there, my fingers curled around the edges like it might float away if I didn't anchor it. Grandpa had told me to wait for the moment they made it clear. They never planned to include me. Well, moment received. They thought ripping the paper would erase me, but they forgot. He never trusted them with the original. I gathered the torn pieces slowly, pressing each one flat on my lap, as if they were petals from something sacred. I didn't look at anyone, not Seraphine, not Margot, and definitely not the lawyer who'd just let it happen without a blink. My hands stayed steady, but inside, I was calculating. That letter hadn't been a surprise attack. It was insurance. Grandpa knew what they were capable of. The version I'd just watched Seraphine destroy, that wasn't the only one he'd given me. It wasn't even the one that mattered most. Still, watching it shredded like grocery mail in front of a room full of people who already treated me like a footnote, that stung deeper than I cared to admit. Bellamy cleared his throat like he was about to say something, then didn't. His silence had weight, heavy, intentional. I lifted my eyes and met his. "You saw the seal," I said. "You know it was real?" He looked down at the open folder in front of him and adjusted his glasses without answering. Then, almost like he hadn't heard me at all, he turned to Leonard. "Do you have anything else to add on behalf of the family?" On behalf of the family. There it was again, that phrase they always used to close the door, to remind me that I wasn't part of the inner circle anymore, if I ever had been. Leonard simply shook his head. "Nothing that isn't obvious." My father hadn't said my name once, not even when my letter had been torn to pieces right in front of him. It wasn't that he didn't care, it was that he wanted me to see it, to feel what it was like to be erased so thoroughly. Even your name left a bad taste. A rustle of paper. Someone coughed. I stood up, not in anger, not to make a scene, but because sitting felt like surrender, and I wasn't done yet. 2 weeks before Grandpa passed, I said to the room, voice clear and even. He told me they would do this, that the only thing more dangerous than a lie was silence, and that if I ever found myself in a room full of people trying to rewrite the truth, I should remember who taught me to build with my hands. Seraphine scoffed. "Oh, please, don't turn this into a speech." She was still standing by the table, the torn paper a crumpled mass in her fist. "You think anyone believes that little drama you staged?" she went on. "Grandpa was sick, confused. You saw him maybe once a year, and suddenly you're the keeper of his legacy? You really think the only thing he left me was paper?" I asked. That got her attention. Her mouth twitched, just slightly. "What are you talking about?" But I didn't answer. Instead, I folded the remains of the letter and placed them back inside my coat. The same coat I'd worn when Grandpa handed me the real envelope. That moment played again in my mind, me sitting next to him on the porch swing, the late summer breeze carrying the scent of fresh-cut grass. He'd been quiet that evening. We'd shared a cup of lemon tea, and I remember him saying, "They'll come for it, Ria, not because they want it, but because they can't stand the idea of you having anything they didn't give you. That's the difference. You earn things. They inherit." A few minutes later, I left the building through the side exit. No one tried to stop me. I wasn't worth the trouble. Not yet. Outside, the late afternoon had dipped into golden hour. The sky had that amber sheen Savannah gets in September when the heat hasn't quite let go, but the shadows have started to lengthen. I didn't rush to my car. Instead, I walked 2 blocks down to the park Grandpa used to take me to. Same cracked bench, same magnolia tree that leaned just a little too far left. I sat, pulled out my phone, and sent a message to the one person Grandpa told me to contact if things ever went sideways. All I typed was, "It's time." A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. "Bring what you have. They can't erase paper trails." I took a deep breath and finally let the silence settle. Not because I was giving up, but because I was getting ready. They took my name off the deed, but they forgot. I still have the key with his initials. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I drove past the courthouse, out of town, through the stretch of country road that led to Spring Ridge House. The sun was starting to dip behind the tree line, casting that honey-colored light across the edges of the fields. The last time I drove this road, Grandpa was sitting in the passenger seat, talking about chimney repairs and how we'd finally need to replace the shutters. When I pulled up to the gates, something felt off. There was a sleek black SUV parked just outside the front circle, and the front lights of the house were on, even though no one was supposed to be living there. I tried the front gate keypad, out of habit. It buzzed, flashed red. Invalid code. I backed up, parked across the street near the old mailbox, and walked around the side yard. The hydrangeas Grandpa had planted were wilted and choking behind overgrown weeds. The side fence, the one only he and I ever used, had been cut and replaced with a newer latch. The back porch door didn't budge when I turned the knob, so I checked the windows. The smallest one by the pantry, always the one we left cracked in the summer, was still open just enough to slip a hand through. I climbed in, scraped my elbow on the frame, and landed inside with a dull thud on the old hardwood floor. It smelled different now, stale air fresheners and something artificial. Gone was the scent of old books, lemon polish, and cedar. I moved quietly through the hallway, bypassing the main staircase, and headed straight to my old bedroom. Or what used to be mine. The nameplate was gone. No Reagan's room like it had read since I was 6. In its place was a sticky note that read, "Holiday decor." I pushed the door open and my breath caught. It was a storage closet now, cardboard boxes labeled Misk, a rusted exercise bike, a fake Christmas tree still in shrink wrap. My bookshelf was gone. So was the hand-carved bed Grandpa had spent 2 months sanding himself. In the far corner, I spotted something familiar, an old photo frame I'd made in middle school, buried under a pile of broken blinds. I didn't touch anything. I walked out slowly, heart numb, the sound of my boots echoing down the hallway where family used to shout my name. Now it was just dust and other people's junk. I made my way downstairs and pushed open the double doors to the sitting room. That's when I saw it. A for sale sign leaning against the fireplace, not in the yard, not outside, but tucked away inside, like they'd tried to hide it from curious eyes. I pulled out my phone, typed in the house address into Zillow, and there it was. Pending sale. My name wasn't anywhere, but listed under property contact was Margot Greystone, my stepmother. Of course it was her. My throat tightened, not with sadness, but with disgust. She hadn't just taken over Grandpa's home, she was getting ready to sell it, flip it like some fixer-upper with no soul. I pressed call. Seraphine answered after the second ring, her tone already sharp. "You're not supposed to be there. You listed Springridge?" I kept my voice low, steady. "Without telling anyone?" She sighed. "You're not anyone who needs to be told." There was a pause. I heard her breathe in, slow and deliberate. "You always act like being left out is some personal attack. Maybe it's not about you, Reagan. Maybe it's just business." I ended the call before she could finish. I didn't have the energy to let her rewrite that too. As I walked back through the house, past Grandpa's favorite reading chair, the fireplace where he used to read Twain to me, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the small velvet pouch I'd kept zipped into the lining since his funeral. Inside was a key. Not just any key, his spare, the one with the tiny initials MG, etched crudely into the base with his old wood-burning tool. It was heavy, solid, real. I stared at it in my palm as the light from the hallway flickered against its teeth. They could fake paperwork, twist words, sell off furniture, repaint rooms, but they couldn't erase that key. That house was never just wood and brick. It held memories, promises, pain. My mother's wedding veil was still boxed upstairs, her books, the old record player that skipped during Sinatra. 2 years ago, Grandpa had said, "You'll know when to take it back." I did now. I left through the side door, retraced my steps across the yard, and drove back into town in silence. I didn't play music, didn't think about what I'd say next, but I knew this much. They could try to erase me all they wanted, but the house knew who it belonged to. They took my voice off the stage, but I had already sent my proof to someone who still believed in truth. The morning after the ambush at Springridge, I sat at the corner booth of a diner 3 blocks from the courthouse, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee and picking at dry toast. My phone buzzed against the Formica table, an unknown number. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened my inbox and stared at the email again. The subject line read, "Legacy Narrative Adjustments." It had come in late the night before, CC'd to me by mistake, sent from Seraphine's PR consultant. Beneath all the corporate lingo and empty pleasantries was one damning line. "If she submits anything for the memorial service, make sure it doesn't air. That message needs to disappear." I reread it twice, just to make sure I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't. The memorial was scheduled for 1 p.m. at the largest chapel in Savannah. It had been planned without me. Invitations, speaker list, press coverage, all handled by Seraphine and Leonard. They didn't bother telling me where to sit because they assumed I wouldn't show. But I did. I arrived 20 minutes early, slipped in through the side entrance, and found an empty spot in the 3rd row, out of direct sight of the cameras. Seraphine stood at the podium, dressed in a dove-gray suit, her voice soft and perfectly modulated. "My grandfather taught us grace," she said, "and legacy. And that family isn't who shares your blood. It's who shares your vision." I almost laughed. Almost. After her, the estate lawyer gave some formal remarks, followed by a community leader Grandpa once supported with his Veterans Fund. I kept quiet, calm. I wasn't there to steal a spotlight. I was there to see if they had the nerve to cut me out completely. They did. When the media director announced, "We'll now show a tribute video prepared by members of the family," I felt the shift. My clip was supposed to be included at the 5-minute mark, 4 minutes and 37 seconds in, to be exact. I'd timed it. Instead, it cut directly from Seraphine's montage to a closing slide with the Greystone Foundation logo and a soft piano track. The MC, not missing a beat, said into the mic, "Due to a technical glitch, we'll conclude here. Thank you all for being with us today." Polite applause, no gasps, no objections. Just a tidy ending. I stayed seated, counted to 10, and then got up without looking at anyone. Outside, the parking lot was a mix of soft murmurs and camera clicks. I ignored them. What mattered wasn't what was shown on screen, it was what was already in motion. 2 nights before, I had recorded my own tribute video in the garage of the small rental house I lived in. I used my phone, a tripod made from stacked books, and natural light from the one unbroken window. No script, just my voice, and Grandpa's voice at the end from an old voicemail he'd left me during my second tour overseas. "This isn't about money," he'd said. "It's about remembering who cared when no one was looking." I labeled the file "In Case They Cut Me" and uploaded it to a secure drive. That link had already been sent to one person, Miles, the private document analyst Grandpa once worked with, the same one he trusted to verify personal estate files in the past. I walked straight from the chapel to Miles's office. He didn't work out of some glossy firm downtown. His place was above a barber shop, with a doorbell that buzzed 3 seconds too late and stairs that creaked under every step. He didn't ask questions, just took the USB from my hand and said, "You want this confirmed and time-stamped?" I nodded. He plugged it in, watched the video silently, then looked up at me. "They cut this?" "They tried." He clicked a few keys, saved the file into an encrypted folder, and backed it up to 3 separate locations. Then he handed me a printed copy of the email thread Seraphine's team had sent. I hadn't asked him to dig for it, but he had. Someone on their team sent this from a public network. "Sloppy, too easy to trace," he said. "This'll hold up in court." I thanked him and left the building with a strange stillness inside me. Not pride, not victory, something quieter, the kind of peace that comes from knowing you didn't let them shut you up. That night, I returned to the rental and sat on the porch with a notebook, writing out everything I could remember about the last few months. Every email, every offhand comment, every shift in tone. I didn't trust memory anymore. I needed paper, ink, timelines. Before bed, I checked my phone one last time. A message waited, from Seraphine. No greeting, no apology, just, "This is beneath you, Reagan. Let it go." I didn't respond. I forwarded it to Miles. Then I shut off my phone, pulled the blanket over my knees, and watched the porch light flicker against the bushes, wondering how many lies they thought they could bury in silence. Because here's what they never understood. Silence isn't the absence of voice. It's the moment before it rises. The judge wouldn't ignore this, not when I had records, receipts, and the key they never saw coming. The following morning, I left the house before the sun had finished climbing over the horizon. The streets were quiet, blanketed in that early golden stillness that only Savannah could offer. I drove out toward Spring Ridge, not because I had to, but because I needed to. Something in my gut told me that the answers I hadn't yet found were still hiding inside those walls. I parked 2 houses down. The same SUV was still in the driveway, tires angled like someone had left in a rush and never fixed it. I slipped the velvet pouch from my coat and took out the key. Grandpa's initials were still there, carved deep, uneven, hand-burned, permanent. I moved along the side path, pushed open the gate behind the tool shed, and entered through the cellar door, which still had the old slide lock Grandpa never bothered to fix. Inside, the air was heavier than I remembered, more stale than sacred. I knew where to go. Back office, left hallway, behind the false panel under the built-in bookcase. My fingers knew the panel's edges without even looking. I pulled gently until it clicked. Inside were 2 items, a black ledger and a bank envelope marked Private RG. I sat cross-legged on the hardwood floor and opened them. The ledger wasn't just numbers, it was evidence of a plan. Monthly transfers, all marked Legacy Allotment. Every deposit went into a trust account created in my name until 12 months ago. That's when the routing numbers changed. My name remained, But the destination bank was different, and the recipient? Not me. It was Seraphine, not just her. The trust was registered under the Greystone Family Charity Initiative, a name she had plastered all over brochures, donor drives, and brunch tables. The same charity she'd been parading as proof of her virtue. The same one she'd claimed she'd built from the ground up. Except it was never hers, it was mine. Every cent came from Grandpa. Every dollar she'd been flaunting came from a fund meant for me. And he had made sure it wasn't just sentiment. He had left documentation. I copied the routing history with my phone, scanned the ledgers page by page, and then pulled the manila envelope open. Inside, a single folded document, signed by Grandpa, notarized, dated 2 weeks before his stroke. Fund to be held in Reagan Greystone's name, accessible only through her verified identity. No secondary access authorized. Use only if legal attempts are made to redirect. He knew. I don't know how, but he knew. I folded everything carefully, replaced the panel, and retraced my steps to the cellar, locking the latch behind me. My car ride back into town was silent. I didn't need music. I needed clarity, and I got it. That afternoon, I drove to the north side of town. There, tucked between a dog grooming service and a tax office, was the place I needed, Evron Associates. The nameplate hadn't changed in over 20 years. Mr. Evron had been Grandpa's accountant since the mid-'80s, and the only person in that family's orbit who ever treated me like I wasn't invisible. I walked in without an appointment. The receptionist looked up. "Can I help?" "Tell Roger it's Reagan Greystone. I have the file Marshall told him to expect." Her eyebrows lifted. "Oh." 10 minutes later, I was seated across from the man himself. Older now, eyes more sunken, but still wearing the same mustard sweater vest he always had. He looked at the ledger and the folder and said nothing for a long time. Then he nodded once. "Marshall didn't trust many people at the end, but he trusted you." He slid a drawer open and pulled out another file, thicker, older, with yellowed edges. He left a backup, same documentation, same fund. "Only difference is, yours was supposed to be public." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "He wanted the charity in your name, not Seraphine's. He had plans, vet support, housing for female soldiers. You were going to run it, after the military, after everything." I stared at him, my mind scrambling to keep up. "She used my fund to build her image. She's giving speeches about veterans like she's ever sat in a VA waiting room." He handed me another slip, one Seraphine had signed, notarized, and dated, approving a transfer from that account into her foundation. Forged signature. She had lifted mine from an old medical document. Roger confirmed it wasn't authentic. "They're not just stealing money," I said. "They're laundering memory." He nodded again. "And now you have everything you need to stop them." I left his office with 2 folders, 1 USB drive, and an assurance that Mr. Evron would testify if needed. Later that day, I walked into a boutique law firm near the courthouse. Sleek, polished. I wasn't interested in drama. I was interested in facts. I stepped up to the receptionist's desk and handed her the files. "Tell your lead counsel I'm not here to sue." She blinked. "Then what?" "I'm here to reclaim what's mine. Tomorrow I would take back more than a house. I'd take back my name." That night, I barely slept. I wasn't anxious. I was ready. The kind of readiness that comes when you've done your part, gathered every document, and laid your truth bare. My coffee went cold on the windowsill while I read through Evron's files again, highlighting everything Grandpa had quietly put in place. Every word, every signature, every clause lined up like a quiet army. At 8:27 a.m., my phone buzzed. A text from Evron. "We're parked. I have it in hand." "You?" 5 minutes out. By 8:40, I pulled into the courthouse parking lot and spotted Evron waiting by his rust-colored Lincoln, holding a sealed envelope close to his chest like it carried national secrets. I nodded to him and we walked inside together, two people invisible to that family until now. The hearing wasn't scheduled to start until 9 o'clock, but the courtroom was already buzzing. I stepped through the doors and saw Seraphine seated at the counsel table, flanked by two attorneys in matching navy suits, like they'd been pulled straight from a magazine ad for generational wealth. She didn't look at me, didn't need to, her posture said enough. Confident, untouchable. I took my seat on the opposite bench and placed the folder and the USB on the table. No theatrics, no glares, just truth, ready to speak for itself. Judge Kinley entered exactly on time. Gray bob, burgundy robe, eyes that had seen every excuse in the book. She scanned the room and got straight to it. This court has reconvened to examine new evidence regarding the estate of Marshall Greystone. Ms. Reagan Greystone, you have requested to introduce material previously withheld? Yes, Your Honor, I replied, standing. I have a notarized document from Mr. Roger Evron, longtime accountant to the deceased, along with a video file recorded by Mr. Greystone prior to his death. Please proceed. Evron stood, adjusted his blazer, and walked the letter to the bailiff. The judge accepted it and began reading immediately. It wasn't long before her expression shifted, just slightly. Not surprise, but recognition. This letter confirms that the Spring Ridge estate was intended to be transferred in full to Ms. Reagan Greystone, she read aloud, and that all previous assumptions or verbal agreements made by other parties are to be considered void unless recorded in legal form. She paused, then looked up at Seraphine. Do you have anything to contest this with, counselor? Her lawyer stood, poised. Your Honor, we were under the impression that the original copy of such a letter did not exist. We would request a handwriting and document authenticity examination. It has already been authenticated, I said calmly. 2 independent analysts confirmed it yesterday. Both reports are included in that folder. Judge Kinley nodded. Let's view the video. The courtroom lights dimmed, and the flat screen on the wall flickered to life. Grandpa appeared, seated in his favorite armchair, sunlight pooling through the window behind him. If you're seeing this, he began, it means they did exactly what I warned you they would. He spoke slowly, clearly, no confusion in his voice, no trembling hands, just that steel steadiness that had carried him through war and boardrooms. They'll tell you it was never yours, that you didn't earn it, but you did, because you never asked for it. You just showed up. You listened when no one else did. You stayed when I was hard to love. So I'm giving you what I built. He paused, leaned in a little closer to the camera. This house isn't just walls, it's memory, and if they try to strip your name from it, this video is your receipt. The screen went black. Silence fell over the courtroom like a dropped curtain. For the first time, Seraphine shifted in her chair. One of her lawyers leaned in and whispered something. Her jaw tightened. She didn't argue, though. She couldn't. Outside, the media had already caught wind of the hearing. A local news station had been tipped off by someone, maybe even one of the courthouse clerks. Within 30 minutes, the clip had leaked. By lunchtime, a Twitter thread had gone viral. The PR queen's sister just dethroned her in court. Screenshots of Grandpa's face, headlines questioning Seraphine's foundation, comments from veterans who remembered Reagan showing up to memorial events while Seraphine posed for photo ops. And then came the calls. Board members from the Greystone Foundation, donors, even family friends who hadn't called me in 5 years. Suddenly, everyone remembered I existed. Suddenly, I was useful again, but I didn't answer any of them. I sat in the back corner of the courthouse cafeteria with a tuna sandwich and a bottle of water, letting the buzz swirl around me without pulling me in. By 3:15, Judge Kinley reconvened and issued her interim ruling. Until a full final judgment is rendered, she announced, all transactions involving the Spring Ridge estate are to be frozen. No sale, no transfer, no reallocation. Furthermore, the court finds that Ms. Reagan Greystone's documentation warrants recognition and priority for consideration as primary heir. Seraphine didn't look at me when we passed in the hallway. She didn't have to. She knew, and that was enough. But the real legacy wasn't the mansion. It was what I chose to build inside it. I arrived early, 30 minutes before the final hearing, dressed in all black. Nothing dramatic, just clean lines, simple slacks, a high-collar blouse, and boots I could walk miles in. No jewelry, no lipstick, just me, present, unapologetic. The courthouse steps were already lined with local media. Some I recognized from the neighborhood newspaper, others from stations I hadn't watched in years. They didn't call my name when I walked past, but they didn't look away either. That was enough. Inside, the air was cooler, formal. Judge Kinley was already seated when I entered. Her expression was unreadable. That was her gift, neutrality with a heartbeat. I took my place. Evron sat behind me, calm and steady. Seraphine was late. She swept in 3 minutes after the hour, flanked by only one attorney this time. Her hair was slightly disheveled, foundation patchy at the jawline. Her phone buzzed against her clutch, which she didn't answer. She barely looked at me, but I noticed the tremor in her hand when she sat down. Kinley began, voice firm. This court has reviewed all submitted evidence. We have confirmed the authenticity of the letter produced by Mr. Evron, as well as supporting bank documentation, and the audiovisual file presented by Ms. Reagan Greystone. She paused, gaze direct. Do you have anything further to add, Ms. Seraphine Greystone? Seraphine stood slowly, cleared her throat, then offered the faintest shake of her head. No, Your Honor. No speech, no denial, no spin. That was the loudest silence she had ever given. Kinley continued. Then this court finds Reagan Greystone the sole legal heir of the Spring Ridge estate, as designated by Marshall Greystone in a signed, notarized, and independently verified document. Seraphine's jaw clenched. The judge wasn't finished. All actions to obstruct this inheritance, digitally or physically, are deemed void and subject to reversal. This includes the attempted sale of the property, the reallocation of trust funds, and all associated public representations of ownership. She turned her attention to the bailiff, who exited briefly, then returned carrying a modest black box. Ms. Greystone, Kinley said, this house carries more than walls. It carries legacy. Use it well. The bailiff approached my table. He opened the box, revealing 2 items, the original deed, updated, certified, embossed with the Gold County seal, and the key. My grandfather's key, the one I hadn't seen since I was 17, the one that used to hang from the hook beside the kitchen door. Its edges were worn, the brass dulled with age, but the initials remained, MG. I stood, took it gently from the box, and felt the room shift. No applause, no grand moment, just a passing of weight from one generation to the next. I didn't look at Seraphine as I walked past her table, though I saw her shoulders tighten. Her eyes never met mine. She just sat there, stunned and small. She had come dressed for a crowning, but left with nothing but silence. Outside, the air was warmer than I expected. The crowd of cameras parted as I stepped through the doors. For a split second, I caught my reflection in the glass panel. Not broken, not erased, whole. I didn't give a statement, didn't wave. I simply got into my car, placed the deed on the passenger seat, and turned toward the one place I hadn't allowed myself to visit freely in months: the house. I pulled into the Spring Ridge driveway at noon. The gates were unlocked, the lawn slightly overgrown, as if it had been waiting for someone who hadn't come home in a while. I parked, stepped out, and walked to the front door, not through the side, not through a window, but with the key that belonged to me. It slid into the lock with a subtle click, like it remembered me. Inside, the air was still. Dust swirled in shafts of light spilling through the living room windows. My boots echoed on the hardwood, each step feeling like it belonged. I didn't cry. Instead, I walked through each room slowly, touching door frames, adjusting crooked paintings, noting what needed patching. In the hallway, I passed the old photo of my mother in her wedding dress, still crooked, still half covered by glare. I left it that way. In the kitchen, I opened the fridge, empty. I didn't mind. I didn't come back for what could be eaten. I came back to rebuild. And if you've ever been erased by the people who were supposed to protect you, build something so loud they can't ignore it anymore. The week after the ruling passed in a rhythm all its own. No reporters camped out anymore. No more calls from lawyers or former board members wanting to reconnect. The noise faded, and in its place came something softer. Stillness. I spent the first few days at Spring Ridge alone. The air inside had that unused quality, like the house had been holding its breath. I opened the windows wide, let the light in, and started cleaning out the rooms one by one. I began with my mother's study. It was tucked in the back wing where few people ever bothered to go. When I pushed the door open, it smelled faintly of lavender and ink. The books were still in place, though many were gathering dust, their spines sagging, some pages yellowed with time. In the bottom drawer of her old roll-top desk, I found a faded manila folder labeled in Grandpa's handwriting, Reagan, Plan. Inside were sketches, blueprints, notes, all outlining his dream of turning Spring Ridge into a home for displaced female veterans. His handwriting was still sharp, steady. In the margins, he'd written, "This house was built to shelter more than one story." I sat with that for a long while. By the end of the week, I'd registered the property as a nonprofit. Quietly, no press, no ribbon cutting, just a signature on a form, notarized, sealed, and filed with the county. We called it the Hollow Foundation. No big website. Just a mission: transitional housing and emotional support for women returning from service who'd been chewed up and spit out by the system. No questions asked. Our first guest arrived on a Thursday morning. Her name was Tori, 26, discharged honorably after reporting harassment by her commanding officer. She carried 2 duffel bags and an expression I recognized too well, part defiance, part defeat. I didn't ask her anything, just handed her a mug of chamomile tea and showed her to the room with the yellow curtains. She stood in the doorway for a moment, not stepping inside, as if she wasn't sure she was allowed to. "You're safe here," I said. She nodded, but didn't speak. Just stepped in, sat on the edge of the bed, and let the silence hold her. That night, I walked the halls alone. Spring Ridge didn't echo the same way it used to. The creaks in the floorboards didn't feel haunted. They felt like memory stretching its legs again. As I passed the staircase, I saw movement through the glass at the front gate. It was Seraphine. She stood in the cold, arms crossed, not shivering, but not steady either. She didn't ring the bell. She didn't call out. Just stood there like she was waiting for something, maybe permission. I didn't open the gate. Instead, I walked down to the end of the driveway, far enough that we could see each other clearly, but close enough to know we weren't having a conversation. She looked at me, eyes dull, makeup minimal, voice small. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I tilted my head slightly. She added, I didn't know he left it all for you. I thought, I thought I had to fight for what I was owed. You weren't owed this, I said. She blinked. You're right. There was a long pause, then she glanced at the house, at the open windows, at the sound of music playing faintly upstairs. This is what you're doing with it? She asked. I nodded once. She offered the barest smile, almost imperceptible. Then she turned and left. Some doors stay closed for good reason. Later that night, I stood in the hallway where Grandpa used to hang our family pictures. Most of them were gone now, packed away or tossed in boxes during the chaos. But one photo remained, tucked behind an old bulletin board. It was the two of us. Me, probably 5 years old, sitting on his lap wearing a paper crown made from birthday wrapping paper. He wore one too, crooked and too small for his head, grinning like it was the best hat he'd ever owned. I pinned it to the board. No frame, just thumbtacks. Underneath it, I wrote, Legacy isn't what you leave, it's who you trust to carry it. Some families don't need to scream to silence you. They just write you out quietly and expect you not to notice. But silence doesn't mean surrender. Sometimes the strongest revenge is reclaiming your name without ever raising your voice. Have you ever been treated like a stranger in your own family? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe for more true, powerful revenge stories that hit close to home.